So I'll start with a background question. For those who are not familiar, why is a partnership between the United Nations and the private sector potentially detrimental to the advancement of gender equality, SDG 5, and women's human rights? I'll just mute myself while you speak.
Thanks so much. I think I want to answer this question, I feel like, at two levels, because you've kindly introduced me on my sort of two fronts. And let me be a little bit sort of armchair academic for a moment and just sort of remind people, what is the United Nations, right? And what is the private sector? And ultimately, the United Nations is supposed to be this intergovernmental agency and a sort of space for member states to work together. And the binding connection here is the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. It is a commitment to progressive development of human rights, right? And I think civil society activists have found their entry point into this space because of the importance of that framework to everything that they do. But the private sector has been trying to buy its way in. And what is the legitimacy of that, I think, is a fundamental question. Because when we have, for example, when NGOs try to participate in the United Nations, whether that's in the sustainable development process through the Rio Earth Summit, there's recognition of the major groups and other stakeholders, which, by the way, business entities are one of those 9. Or whether that's through the Commission on the Status of Women, or whether that's a Human Rights Council, we get accreditation. That means that there's some type of validation of our genuine, structure, purpose, and what we're doing, and accountability, so that there's some sort of feasibility to why we are in that space. The private sector, however, these big multinational companies are buying their way in and sort of signing these backroom deals for which there is just no transparency. And this, I think, is a fundamental feminist principle. Transparency is important to all marginalized communities. It is a problem and always beats down on the most oppressed. Whether that's a non-disclosure agreement that enables the sexual harasser, that enables the structures of racism, or whether that's a backroom secret MOU signed between what the UN is calling private partners that they say that they cannot disclose. And this is at a bigger scale as well. We make the same demand of governments when they sign free trade agreements. We say that that's a problem. A government that's been elected for 4 or 5 years signing a free trade agreement that will run for a generation or longer, that's a problem. That needs oversight and accountability. And if you're not going to make it public, then at least make sure that the other branches of a democratic system, such as the legislative body, parliament, and all that, can have some type of review. Here, how is the United Nations supposed to enter an agreement with the private sector and then say that it's secret, we can't share what's going on here? That is classic corporate capture. And that is what we're fighting against. And to bring it more specific and less, like I said, armchair sort of theorizing, what exactly is going on here with regards to BlackRock and UN Women? What exactly is going on with UN Women and the other UN agencies that are signing agreements left, right, and center? In our letter, we brought attention to OHCHR and their $5 million agreement with Microsoft back in 2017. And while we were working on this BlackRock campaign, this real scandal broke out about UNDP Colombia and Geopark, right? Something that was very strenuously opposed by indigenous groups earlier as well. When agreements are made with governments, whether that's through a Right to Information Act or a Freedom of Information request, there are different structures of making sure that there is some visibility and there's some accountability. But when it's with a private entity, then nothing, really? Who do you answer to then? And how do we know what exactly has been promised? And ultimately, how do we know why BlackRock has been selected for partnership with UN Women? What has been the thought process behind it? What were they supposed to bring to the table? Because UN Women has reassured us over and over that, oh, corporations only give us earmarked funds. We're not going to them for funds. We're going to them for other reasons, because they have power, because they are employing women. This is not the way to go about it at all. If the private sector, and here we're talking about large corporations, even if the UN says, oh, small and medium enterprises, but actually the groups that they're signing agreements with, the groups that are sitting on different advisory groups and different projects and boards and stuff like that, these are all big multinational companies that have a vested interest in not only presenting themselves as pro women's rights so that they can have more consumer base, more investors and clients. They're also taking advantage. BlackRock said that they were interested to use UN Women's data for this phenomenon of social impact investing, of which gender lens investing is a type. And this is also another area of concern for those of us in the feminist movement who have been looking closely at this phenomenon. And we know that what is going on here is yet another iteration of women's labor and women's contribution being taken advantage of with no promise, again, of accountability at the end. We have, myself and my colleague Diana Yahaya, we mentioned during the webinar that we have worked with AWID on a piece of research to really understand what is gender lens investing or what is gender impact investing promising. And I'm sorry to say, but not one person could give us an example. And we asked several people, what is the go-to example that we can look at and say that here's the investor on the one end of the chain, and here's the community or group that's been invested in on the other end of the chain that's benefited from the investment and the return has gone back. Nobody's given us a single example of that. And what Miriam van der Steekel spoke about in the BlackRock webinar was very much about the fact that the risk assessment that these investment groups are doing are very much about themselves and their investment. It is not about women. It is not about communities. It is not about rights. So yeah, that in not so much a nutshell, maybe several nuts, the answer to the problems with this type of collaboration between the United Nations and the private sector.
Wow, that's extremely helpful. It looks like transparency and accountability are the two words that kept coming up. I also just wanted to caveat to a question I was thinking about when reading the open letter. In the open letter, it was mentioned that this partnership is pinkwashing. For those not familiar with that term, can you just give us a background? What does that mean?
You know what? I'll throw all of them in. Greenwashing, pinkwashing, blue washing. All of these are basically gestures that companies make to make themselves look good, but not actually delivering on the actions, right? And pinkwashing refers to it when they're doing it in regards to gender and women's rights. Blue washing is when they do some type of noble partnership with the United Nations and they use the blue of the United Nations logo to make themselves legitimate, make themselves a champion of human rights without actually doing anything or pretending to do something at a very surface level. And greenwashing is absolutely about the environmental aspect of it. And what you'll find in all three of these is that when whichever ones the private sector engage in, it is always very surface level. It is always very meet and greet, and a lot of the time it overlaps with what they call corporate social accountability, corporate social responsibility, which are these nice projects that are at the end of the chain once they've taken all the profits, where they do a little sort of income generation project, which I'm not saying doesn't help. Of course, when we have inequality at the highest level that we've known in human history at this, in living history at this point, there is some good done along the way. But what feminist movements and social justice movements are asking for is large-scale, systemic, structural change. And if they're going to do these small piece projects, then we're never going to address that issue of power, and we're never going to address the fact that along the way, they have done a lot of damage and they're not addressing that damage. So let's take a look at Microsoft and OHCHR. $5 million to OHCHR can do a lot of good because these UN agencies are strapped. And if it was not earmarked, I don't know if it is earmarked, but we're hearing from the UN agencies that all of these are always earmarked when it comes to corporations. So that's another flag. Corporations, if you want to give money to human rights, just give it. Don't tell them what to do with it. But looking at that, what Microsoft should be doing is paying their workers living wages, making sure that everybody that helps them along the way, along the supply chain, as well as in terms of care and domestic work, all of those people involved get paid. And what do I mean by that? You know, the production line for Microsoft goes all the way to China. There's a lot of health issues for workers who don't have protective gear in putting together some of this technology. There are no pensions for these workers, and so on and so forth. So why not direct those millions of dollars to those workers that have helped Microsoft become the behemoth that it is? Why not make sure that even if you just if you don't go down the supply chain route and you just stick to the offices in Silicon Valley, why not make sure that the mostly feminized and migrant labor who are cleaning your offices and holding your space together? Because Silicon Valley is very well known for the beautiful workspaces with all kinds of perks over there, but that's all held together by service industry and by sanitation and cleaning and domestic work, and none of this is valued correctly. If Microsoft, if Amazon, any of these organizations were really serious about change, then they would start with labor rights. They would start with recognition of all kinds of work that make their companies what they are, and remunerate those people accordingly, and make sure that they have health care and social protection and pensions.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay, this is so important. Thank you so much, Sanam. I'm like a student here. I just need to take all these notes with everything you're saying. Okay, so I did mention the open letter. For those who are not familiar, there was an open letter that was signed by over 600 individuals and organizations calling for the ending of this partnership. Now, the open letter does detail a few things, like BlackRock's contributions to the climate crisis. But another thing that the open letter details is the BlackRock's involvement in external private debt, specifically in the global south. So I would just like to hear you speak on that. Maybe you can give us a bit of background on BlackRock and the issue with debt in the global south.
So let's first try and knock down some of this idea that investment bankers and financial gurus are really smart people who are making calculated risks and making and that's how they're making their wealth. Really, the gap that we see a lot of the time with economic and financial understanding is a lot of people being intimidated by this facade, when actually it is elitism that's sort of masking the fact that what investment bankers are doing is pure and simple gambling. And anybody can gamble. It's just that because of the structures of power that concentrate, not just wealth, but also information. Insider trading is something I won't delve into at this point, but this is the kind of thing that a coterie of close elites are able to enable each other and give tips to each other and share. And this is the kind of culture and environment that investment banking is really all about. Now, hedge fund managers and all of that will say that, oh, no, there's a lot of expertise, there's a lot of McKinsey reports and stuff like that. But this is what it really boils down to. Speculation and gambling done on a large scale. And a lot of the time it does pay off because they are relying on certain structures that have always benefited them. But it doesn't always pay off. And one of the points that we made in the webinar was that, actually BlackRock has lost over $1 trillion of client money this year. So this, like I said during the webinar, highlights how losses and debt are always to the public and profits always are private. So what happens here is the nefariousness of involving the private sector in a lot of what should be public work, what should be work that is managed in a way that enables and doesn't trap people and countries in debt. Now, the example we referred to was Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka is currently defaulting on loans that were taken out after its civil war for reconstruction. A lot of the time, these arguments are made, especially for small and developing countries, that you need to balance the budget, you need to pay your debts. But managing a national budget is not the same as managing a household budget. And the reality is that the more that you invest in the public sector, in services and public infrastructure, this is not just better for the entire country and the good of the people, but it is better for women. Women rely on public services, public transport more. And all of these things, I think, sort of circle back to the fact that small countries, developing countries, are often pressured to take loans. Some of these loans come from the international financial institutions. Some of these loans come from other countries. And a lot of the time, those comes with certain conditions saying that you can't spend this much or that much. And there's a lot of fraught history there, not just of global South countries, but of within the European Union, the Greek financial crisis, when austerity measures were pushed down on Greece as well. So this kind of thing, debt is often used to trap poor countries into a hopeless scenario where they're constantly repaying debt and they're not spending on the things that they need to improve the lives of their people and of the nation. With regards to Sri Lanka, they were also pressured into taking private loans, and those private loans then get bought up by entities like BlackRock and a few other companies. Now, BlackRock and other companies defend that, we're not the ones starting the debt, we're not the ones who are driving all of this. They make the same argument about fossil fuels as well, that we didn't actually do that. But you know what? It is your money that's going there, and it is the profit that you take back at the end of the day. And it is because of your participation in this system that it's still holding up together. And this is how a country like Sri Lanka is now defaulting on loans and is in crisis. And this is a really shameful form of slow violence or economic violence, because we see it when a bomb is dropped and people die immediately. We don't see it when a country is trapped in debt and is unable to invest in hospitals, in clinics, in safer roads, in bridges, so that remote communities are able to access basic services. One of the remarkable things that I remember early in my career in Bangladesh, where I'm from, is this hospital boat that separate story there. But one of the things that the hospital boat and the small satellite clinic boats has fulfilled, and this is a nonprofit that's running it, was filling in those gaps in provision of healthcare services in the remote communities, in the small riverine islands in Bangladesh, where there was a woman who could not afford to pay for a boat to cross the river to take her child to the hospital, and lost her child as a result. And this is the kind of moment that you think that, it's poverty. Yes, it is. But if you had let that country do something about it and invest in the infrastructure, in the public services that are needed, then this could have not happened. We don't point to that and say that, that was the World Bank, but it kind of was.
Yeah, you mentioned that a lot of the global South countries in debt leads them to not being able to invest in things that they need to, and like with your story with the woman, and like that sounds like a problem of healthcare as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what I wanted to talk about, you said you closed the webinar with a very powerful statement,
Mm-hmm.
which I need to quote you directly and correctly. You said, "Our oppression is interlinked, but so is our liberation." And I found that to be such a powerful statement, and I wanted you to speak, which you have, but to speak more on the interlinked nature of all these crises, why this is also a racial issue a gender justice issue, a migrant issue, and an economic justice issue. I mean, it's all these things. So if you could just give us a brief, like, just paint the brush, why all these things are it's all interlinked. That would be great.
Well, this is my favorite part, Mumbi, because you are basically asking me to talk about intersectional feminism, which is something I believe strongly in. And the what you're quoting me on is sort of an iteration of something Lila Watson said. You know, if you have come to help me. Um, I think that quote is well known, which she also says that it's not attributed to her individually, but it is in collective as well. And that also reflects that idea that it's all coming together and it's not just one thing. When I say that our oppression is interlinked, it's a recognition that there are structures of oppression like patriarchy, like white supremacy, and several other structures that help each other, that cooperate with each other. And that's why we will see a phenomenon where war is both terrible for communities, but it has deeper impacts on women, but it has deeper impacts on marginalized communities that are minority faith, that are minority race, that are indigenous. And all of this sort of comes across because, like I said, of these interlockings of systems of oppression that create, the specific term that we use is, what do you call it? Well, let me not get technical, and let me just say that it is the fact that we cannot just focus on one thing because all of them come together. It's not happening in isolation. And when I say that migrant justice is economic justice, is gender justice, it is in recognition of that sort of working of structures of oppression together. And the strength, I think, of feminist and social justice movements is when we recognize that sort of structures of oppression and the fact that we have to work together to undo it. Because every moment that I can think of historically that we've stumbled has been when we said, oh, not now, not you. We'll first do this thing and then we'll come back to you later. And that's happened, for example, in, many countries have gone through revolutions where certain groups have come forward and said that we also need to talk about our issues. And then people leading an independence movement will say that, well, we'll come back to that later. Very famously, in the second wave of feminism in the United States, there was that fear of, what was it called? The Lavender Menace. Therefore, sort of talking about queer women, and of course, there was also an impasse there in recognizing the intersectional experiences of Black women and Black queer women as well, where Audre Lorde's thinking becomes so important to recognize as well. So the people that we invited for the webinar were reflective of that interlocking, right? We had somebody representing trade union perspectives and workers' perspectives. We had somebody representing migrant workers' perspectives, and in regard to surveillance capitalism and how that sort of overlaps with detention centers and prisoners as well. These are all vulnerable communities that are affected by capitalism, by a neoliberal economic system that exploits them, that takes prison labor. In the United States, I believe, is still the third largest supplier of cotton worldwide, and much of this cotton is grown in plantations that slaves used to work on, that now prison labor works on. And so you see a long-running history of an unfinished work of abolishing slavery, because that exception was made for prison labor, and now prison labor is fulfilling that demand. And we know this story, like I said, sort of tracing the movement of capital from the global south to the global north through supply chains, the reliance of feminized Southern labor in fragile political contexts where rules can be broken and very few protections exist. These phenomenon happen because, like I said, the coterie of the elite exploit all of those chinks and know that that's the space that they can take advantage of and sort of draw wealth and build their own power. And that's why it's very important for us to recognize that we don't go running and say, please give us back something. We have to see that it's for us to build our own power. And that's why organizing is so important. That's why listening is so important, because like I said, our struggles are interlinked, but they are not the same. And it is important for us to learn from each other, and it is important for us to walk together and fight together and build our power, because that's ultimately what we need to do. We are not going to undo corporate power by asking nicely. We are not going to undo capitalism individually because one hero, one feminist hero or one indigenous hero is going to make a rallying cry and then it's all going to fall apart. There's not going to be a one moment of time where it happens. It's going to be a hive of all of us working together, of all of us playing a relay race and moving ourselves inches forward and changing the narrative and bringing in new ideas and pushing what radical is to the moment that we finally let go of this idea of ideas of capitalism that we have just accepted as though it's been handed to us from the gods, which it is not. Like, why should we be all continuously working to survive? It is not healthy. It is not normal. It is not our history. Capitalism is really only 10 generations old, if we think about it in its modern form. Yes, there's certain interlinkages with feudalism and older structures that also took advantage of peasants and other marginalized communities for their labor. But there have always been alternatives out there. There have always been other ways of doing. And that's what's exciting about knowing that there are communities out there that are managing their own energy. There are matrilineal communities. There are communities that regard land and nature as something that we need to care for as custodians. That's very much the terminology of Indigenous and First Nations peoples. There's, I was privileged a few years ago to visit Chiapas and to really sort of feel that energy of what the Zapatistas have built there. That's a whole other way of being. We can be that. We just need to keep building all of those sort of spaces and work together to sort of change power and see that we will together be able to help each other live a better life and build a better future. I hope that answers it a little bit.
Yes. No, that was wonderful. That was perfect. Collective action, that actually
and
brings
bring down borders, because why should migrants shut down prisons, abolish the police? All of these things help women, help Indigenous and First Nations people, help the oppressed. And there should never be an attitude that, just because it's affecting me more and you less, I shouldn't take action. No, we should always stand in solidarity with each other and do what we can to lift each other up.
Yes, that's so powerful. Yes. I guess my final question would be, what do you think the next steps are? I mean, we've seen people coming together with over 600 people signing the open letter, and then the webinar that had, I think, over 200 people in attendance. And then last week, UN Women said that they would end the partnership, end in quotations, because it wasn't a formal statement. So as we wait for the formal denouncing, what would you say are the next steps? What should feminists be focusing on as we wait?
Well, it's not going to be a quiet waiting. That's one thing. Because, first of all, we have a lot of expectations here. It's not just end the partnership, it's explain the partnership. It's publish the MOUs, publish all the partnerships you're getting into, because like I said, transparency as a feminist principle, something that never helps the weakest and the most oppressed, and only helps the sexual harassers and the racists and the white supremacists to hide themselves. So I don't understand why the United Nations as an intergovernmental entity should not be showing transparency and telling us what partnerships they're getting into and who's brokering them and on what basis. We've been promised from UN Women that they're going to review their private sector strategy and they're going to consult with civil society for that. And some of us have this take that we don't think you even should have partnerships with private sector. So this is kind of a moot conversation. But the fact that you have them means that we need to know what exactly you're doing and how you're doing it. Because you are not the entity that gets to hide and pretend that, you know, we all run after money because they have the money. That's not a fundamental structural analysis that the feminist movement expects. And I think going forward, we need to talk more about this type of structural analysis so that we don't have, you know, just people who do sort of technical work leading agencies thinking that this is just about finessing and service delivery. Looking at the UN Women's strategic plan, I'm very worried about the section that suggests that they're trying to develop their business model. They are not a business. An intergovernmental agency that is supposed to be leading on gender and women's rights is not a business. And where it is today is because of feminist movements and the work that feminist movements have done for generations. People forget that the United Nations and the very drafting of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights had feminists front and center, right? People know very well, for example, the fact that the very first Danish ambassador, Bodil Bechrup, was the one who, along with other feminists, said we don't want a sub-commission within the Commission on the Human Rights. We want a separate commission on the status of women, and that is why there is a commission on the status of women since 1948. Feminists, I think, were there arguably in the form of Toni Sender, a German socialist trade unionist who Joseph Goebbels called a big mouth, by the way, who was present in almost every meeting of the negotiation and drafting of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. So maybe her voice was not written down and maybe she didn't draft it, but she was there every moment. So labor organizers, socialists, feminists were there from the very beginning. And I think we need to bring ourselves back into that space and not be kept in the margins anymore. That's the work that we're going to be doing while we're waiting. Looking forward to CSW as well, which is focusing on digital rights and technology and women as well. I'm going to be very disappointed if this upcoming CSW theme is going to drag in Silicon Valley companies saying that, oh, this is a button that we've done to make our social media space safer for women, when this is absolute nonsense that a few companies get to determine what the digital architecture is like. They're the ones that have made it this toxic space that has brought these patriarchal problems into it, when the digital space could have been anything we wanted. It didn't need to fuel aggression and comment wars and misinformation. They structured it like this, and now they're making us think that, oh, we're doing a little bit to improve it, to make your user experience better. No, it could have been something completely different. And the Commission on the Status of Women in this upcoming March 2023, I think that's something that feminists need to be working towards and demanding that that's the space where we bring groups like Take Back the Tech, where we bring the groups that have been talking about a feminist internet, where we talk about data sovereignty. We talk about where our data is kept and how. The land that is going to server farms and data centers, it's not just Silicon Valley companies anymore. All of the companies, whether they're doing smart cars like BMW or smart refrigerators like LG, all of them are setting up data farms and server farms, and these are taking up huge swathes of land. They're using up huge amounts of water. They're also, Google, for example, is not disclosing how much water they're using up in the United States for their data centers. And these are the feminist issues that we need to talk about: land, resources, space, and real structural change.
Wow, yes. I think we can just close right there because that was so powerful. Thank you so much. This was so informative. This was so helpful. And that's why we wanted to use this space, this Instagram space, to break things down for people, because these conversations, a lot of the people who bear the brunt for these, these partnerships and things like that, have no idea it's going on. So
Mhm.
thank you so, so much for
Thank you,
joining us
Mombi.
today.
And I'm remiss in not saying this at the beginning, but I'm joining you in this conversation from stolen land, and I pay my respects to Indigenous and First Nations people whose care has kept us alive this far. We often think about the fact that all of these companies and fossil fuels and all that have done such irreparable damage. But the fact is we are living and breathing and surviving because of care. And today I join you from Wurundjeri land, sometimes referred to as Melbourne or Narm, but another name is Narm, and I'm honored and acknowledge their custodianship of this land, and with deep gratitude to them and to the many Indigenous communities worldwide who have taken care of 70% of our biodiversity and who should be centered in the conversation worldwide for our survival, for our planet.
Oh, I see that we have one question if you have a few minutes. It says from Mina. Hey, Mina. It says, with UN Women announcing their partnership and, yes, quotes, do you think this will create a ripple effect with other UN agencies? Oh, good question. Yep.
That's a great question, Mina. And I would say it could create a ripple effect if they did it in a certain way. The way that they're doing it now, meekly, quietly, admitting to the press and to civil society when asked that, oh, it's over, we told BlackRock, that is not going to make any changes, because that's kind of how meekly they moved out of the Uber partnership in 2015 as well. It would create a ripple effect if we did the things that I'm talking about, which is publish all partnerships, publish all MOUs. I think that UN Women could very well lead the way and say that, you know what, just like civil society demands that trade and investment agreements be published at every stage of negotiation before they are signed and have public consultations and review, we should start doing that. If the UN Women were to start doing that, then that would put pressure on the other UN agencies to do something similar and show real consultation and real transparency and accountability to all actors worldwide who are affected by their work.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, this brings us to the end of our Instagram Live with Sanam. This was amazing and so informative.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Is there anything that we should have people look out for? Is there anything that you're working on specifically that you'd like us to direct people to as we share when we share this live?
Okay. Okay. Well, I always have a list of things. So I will just say, keep a lookout for the BlackRock hashtag, because we're going to be sharing our updates of our conversations with UN Women in recent days. And we're also thinking about what steps we want to take, because I think we hit a node here. Actually, we opened up the letter again on the week of the webinar, since there was such interest to support us, and we've crossed 700 signatures at this point. So we feel that we also need to come back to everybody who signed on and say, this is what has happened. And we feel that now this is a bigger issue of transparency and corporate capture. And let's talk about how we want to work together to move forward, as Leela Watson would say. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.